And you are podcasting with Gary DeMar. Let's figure things out.
I'm beginning a new podcast series called Bible Prophecy Under the Microscope. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's so much misinformation on this topic, especially given what's happening in the world today, everything from Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in Iran and Israel, the transgender movement, what we saw at the Olympics, kind of the revival, or at least the acceptance of pagan Greek mythology. All of these types of things kind of contribute to a spirit of we're living in the last days. All the evidence is out there to support that particular view. And in my understanding of history and in studying Bible prophecy for a very, very long time and having an extensive library on the subject, this isn't anything new. We have seen this type of thing over the centuries. In fact, when you talk about a revival of something, that means there was a time in the past when those types of things were going on. And so if you have something going on in the Olympics, whether it had anything to do with the Lord's Supper or Greek Dionysus or whatever the case might be, the attempt, of course, was to bring back the spirit of that particular age. And of course, what we know with the Greek culture disappeared. If you go over to Greece, my wife and I did a number of years ago on our 40th wedding anniversary. If you go over there, you'll find that the Greek culture and everything about that culture is a tourist attraction. And we saw the tourist attraction, most of it with these columns, laying on the ground, not doing anything. The Greek culture is dead. Roman culture is dead. The only remnants that we see of these cultures are the actual stupendous architecture that they established. I mean, parts of the Colosseum are still there. Many of the building blocks of the Colosseum were used to build other structures after the collapse of the Roman Empire. The same thing probably with the Greeks, and there were the Greek gods, and then they were refashioned, reshaped by the Roman gods, and those so-called gods have absolutely no impact on the world in which we live. So when we talk about kind of the revival of that type of paganism in our day, we have to look at it and say, we've seen this before. The question is, as Gary North would always state, what's the proper response? And the first response, it seems to be by many people dealing with Bible prophecy, is to say, we're living in the last days. The Antichrist is alive and well on planet Earth today. And it was the same thing that Hal Lindsey said back in 1970 in his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and Dave Hunt said something as well. I remember Hal Lindsey saying, the Antichrist is probably alive somewhere in the world today. Well, if that was in 1970, then that Antichrist is probably my age, and whoever he might be. But the whole focus of what we see in our culture today is based upon a misreading of the time and audience when it comes to Bible prophecy. And we really see this in terms of the Antichrist. So I've labeled this new podcast that I'm doing, and it'll probably evolve over some time as other people kind of give me hints and things. You can do this or do that. Now, this is my first shot at this, so we'll see what happens. But I've titled this Bible Prophecy Under the Microscope. And the closer we get to looking at what Scripture actually says, we get a clearer image of it. So this is what I'm responding to that I saw on Facebook today. And this isn't anything unusual. This is something that's always on Facebook. It's always about the Antichrist. It's always about the book of Revelation. And it's a bits and pieces, piecemeal approach to studying Bible prophecy. If those of you who are listening to this for the first time, if you're interested in this topic beyond what you're hearing here, I suggest a couple of my books, Last Days Madness, which is a comprehensive study of Bible prophecy. If you want something on Matthew 24, the early parts of 23 and Matthew 24 up through verse 34, you can get my book, Wars and Rumors of Wars. If you want something kind of simple to read, short and sweet, I have Is Jesus Coming Soon? And these can all be ordered at AmericanVision.org. And keep in mind, I don't make any royalties on any of these books. I do get a salary at American Vision, and I wear many, many hats in order to get this type of stuff done. But I do not make royalties on my books. So I saw this today, and this is August 1st, 2024. And this person wrote, "The Antichrist will persecute and kill God's people," Revelation chapter 13, verses 7 through 9. Now, anybody who's looking at the Bible has to understand you don't start in the middle of the book. You start at the beginning of the book. And the beginning of the book, in the book of Revelation, very first verse in the book of Revelation it says, "These things are soon to take place." Verse 3 says, "The time is near." So at the very beginning of the book of Revelation, we are told that the events described there are near to take place. They are soon to happen. And then if you go to the last chapter of the book of Revelation, verse 22, verse 10, it also says the time is near. So the book of Revelation is bookmarked by 2 time indicators. You are stuck with those time indicators. You cannot work outside of those time indicators. So you might say, but what about all the stars falling from heaven and the beasts and the dragons and all of the things that are in the book of Revelation? That's a very good question. But you are still bound by the one thing that is very specific in how you begin to read the book of Revelation, and that is the time indicators. And you go down a little bit more in the book of Revelation, and you find out that John, who is this isn't John's book. This is a revelation of Jesus Christ. And John is the one who's receiving this and writing these things down. And if you also go and you look and to see that there were 7 real churches in Asia Minor that received these. These weren't church ages. These were named churches with Christian believers in those churches. And Paul and John describes himself as a fellow partaker in the tribulation and the kingdom of God. So, time indicators, very clear, can't get around them. Then you have John saying, I'm part of this tribulation that is taking part. And so that's where you have to begin with this. There is no other way around this. And I know there have been hundreds and hundreds of commentaries written on the book of Revelation. But if you don't start there, you are going to get the rest of the book wrong. And you say, well, what about all of those things in the book of Revelation? Well, you have to understand them in terms of their literary structure. The book of Revelation is a book of signs. In fact, if you go to Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, John is taken up into heaven. And so what you're seeing here is a visionary aspect of what is going to take place soon because the time was near. And so we have a qualifier in all of this, describing this as a visionary temple. That means what we are seeing are visionary events, sign events that describe things that are going to take place. And those sign events are descriptive of the way the Bible depicts these all the way through the Old Testament. The Old Testament, all the language that you're seeing in the book of Revelation, is pretty much taken from the Old Testament. So if you want to understand the book of Revelation, you have to understand the Old Testament. And so let's begin just in dealing with this particular thing I saw on Facebook. The Antichrist will persecute and kill God's people. Now, right here, we see something that has to be dealt with. The word Antichrist is used. Now, one would expect that if you're going to use the book of Revelation, in particular Revelation chapter 13, verses 7 through 9, that one would find the word Antichrist in the book of Revelation. And you don't have to trust me on this, but get a concordance out and look up the word Antichrist, and you will see that the word Antichrist is not found in the book of Revelation. And that may shock a lot of people. And people will say, oh, well, it's the beast. It's the beast. Well, actually, Revelation 13, there are actually two beasts, and that's not a description of the Antichrist. And so here's what I would like you to do, and you can pause this for a moment, or do this on your own. Get your concordance out and look up every verse that has the word Antichrist in it, and we'll do that in a moment. And it may surprise you. And I have found books that deal specifically with the Antichrist and never actually quote the passages where the word Antichrist is used. And one particular book that I also have on dealing with the Antichrist, yes, he deals with those particular passages, but skips over the audience relevance, the definition of an Antichrist, the number of Antichrists, and the timing of the Antichrists. So this particular person in this post says the Antichrist will persecute and kill God's people. And he never defines Antichrist. A good friend of mine, Bob Cruikshank, wrote, Revelation 13 doesn't mention the Antichrist. It talks about the beast, two different things. The beast was Nero, and he persecuted the first century church for 3.5 years. The only thing I would add here, there are actually two beasts. One is sea beast, which is most likely Rome, and a land beast, which is most likely the apostate religious leaders in Israel who were still functioning up until the destruction of the temple that took place before that generation passed away. And again, if you want more information on that, you get my book, either Last Days Madness, or have a description of the Olivet Discourse, actually Matthew 24 and 25, in Wars and Rumors of Wars, where I have the beginning part of 23, which is necessary to understand, and before you get into Matthew chapter 24, and that's called Wars and Rumors of Wars. And so here's what one guy wrote in response, and this is probably the only thing that I'm going to deal with at this point, and I've got a part 2 to this in the next episode. So this person wrote, and they worshiped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, and who is able to make war with him? Revelation 13:4. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the world, the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Revelation 12:9. Then he goes on to say, notice the dragon as identified as none other than Satan. Also note in the verse about that Satan is deceiving the whole world. And here's what I wrote. Revelation also says that the stars of heaven will fall to the earth. That is in Revelation chapter 6, verse 13. Now remember, this is a visionary prophecy. This is a prophecy filled with signs. So in Revelation chapter 6, we find that it's a description of the stars of heaven fell to the earth. Now let's put on our so-called literal hat and ask the question, if the stars of heaven fell to the earth in Revelation chapter 6, how in the world was there a Revelation chapter 7? The earth would have been completely destroyed. And later, this dragon, this is from Revelation chapter 12, verse 4, and it's interesting that the person posting there goes to Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. But look at Revelation chapter 12, verse 4. This dragon, and this is a quotation, swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. So the earth was completely destroyed in Revelation chapter 6, verse 13, if you take this particular so-called literal approach. And yet this earth is still there when you get to Revelation chapter 12, verse 4, because now this time there's a dragon with his tail who swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Now, you don't even have to know anything about how to interpret this to know that this is not describing something, what we think today of literal interpretation. This is sign evidence here. We are dealing with symbols and signs of things. There are not real dragons out there with tails. There are stars from the heavens, but those stars are not those physical, that stellar phenomena that it's being described here. It's not physical stars. And all you have to do is go to the Old Testament to see how the Old Testament uses stellar phenomena to describe the fall of either political or religious authorities. In fact, if you go to Genesis chapter 37, you will see that Israel is described as sun, moon, and stars. And in chapter 12, you'll see that there is a woman standing on the moon. She has a crown of 12 stars, and she's clothed with the sun. There is not a real woman out in space doing this. This is sign language. That is God giving us signs. In fact, the very first chapter, very first verse tells us that we should be looking for signs, and these signs point to something. So that means in chapter 6, Revelation chapter 6, that the earth would be completely destroyed, and yet the earth is still there in Revelation chapter 12. And if it didn't do enough damage in Revelation chapter 6, it certainly did more than enough damage in Revelation chapter 12, verse 4, because this time a third of the stars of heaven were thrown down to the earth. And again, how could there be a beast, or if you want to say the Antichrist in Revelation chapter 13, when the earth was completely obliterated in chapter 12? It just doesn't make any sense. And not only that, but when you get to chapter 12 of the book of Revelation, you'll find from a lot of Christian prophecy writers that what is going to take place is there's going to be a type of economy where you won't be able to buy or sell, and we'll have microchips in us, and we won't be able to go anywhere unless we have this chip, which is supposed to be a symbol of the 666 that's used there. Well, wait, how's that possible? The earth was just destroyed in chapter 12 and earlier in chapter 6. And all of a sudden we got this great technological advance in the next chapter. It just doesn't make any sense. The earth would have been obliterated and vaporized and everything else if we follow this particular hermeneutic. And I always find this interesting that when you get to chapter 4, which is obviously a signage of things that are taking place, a description of these symbols in heaven, all of a sudden that becomes literal. But when you look at the time indicators of chapter 1, verse 1, and 1:3 and 22:10, all of a sudden they become elastic. Well, near for God is not near for us. And one day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and a day and 1,000 years is a day. We need to be on God's timetable when we come to all this. It's amazing when you have dozens and dozens and dozens of references to near, shortly, and quickly throughout the New Testament, and they all mean near, shortly, and quickly. But when you get to the book of Revelation, they really don't mean what they seem to mean. Now, one other point when I'm going to close with this is that he says here, notice that the dragon is identified as none other than Satan. Also note in the verse above that Satan is deceiving the whole world. Now, this is something that comes up a lot. It's unfortunate that a lot of our translations aren't really as accurate as they should be. And it's a shame because it's gotten people off track here. And I'll give you, this is a perfect example, because the Greek word that's translated world in Revelation 12:9 is not the typical Greek word that we think of when we see the word world. One of the words that is kind of carries over into our language is cosmos. And that is, in fact, that's a transliteration of the Greek word, cosmos. So when we talk about the cosmos, we're talking about the world, much, much larger than just this, our world. And so the word that's being used here in Revelation chapter 12, verse 9 is oikumene. And you say, well, I've never heard of that word before. You don't know Greek. I understand that. I know a little bit of Greek. You don't have to know a lot of Greek to be able to figure out what words are. You can go online. I use Bible Hub. Go to Bible Hub. Type in Revelation 12:9. It'll take you there. Click on the Greek. You don't even have to know how to read Greek in order to go in there and look at it, because the words are also transliterated for us, spelled out in English, although oikumene is almost exactly like in our own alphabet. And you can see, you go down to verse 9, and it's going to say, well, wait a minute, it doesn't say cosmos, it says oikumene. So what is the significance of that? Oikumene is used numerous times in the book of Revelation, and I have a chapter on this in my book, 10 Popular Prophecy Myths, where I deal with every use of oikumene in the New Testament. And one of the most interesting places is in Luke chapter 12, verse 1. Luke 2:1 is that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world be taxed. And that's the King James translation, the whole world. But the Greek word there is not cosmos, it's oikumene. And that makes much more sense because Rome could only tax within its political boundaries. In fact, if you go to Matthew chapter 24:14, it talks about the gospel being preached in the whole world. It's oikumene. That's the word that's used there. And in fact, if you go through the New Testament, you'll find out that the Apostle Paul says the gospel had been preached to, listen to this, every creature under heaven, Colossians 1:23. That's another complete different topic here. But the word oikumene is used here, and it deals with limited geography. You also see oikumene in Acts chapter 11, verse 28, where there talks about a famine over the whole world. Well, it's not the whole wide world. It's not the globe. It was a local judgment. So the oikumene. And the Greek prefix here, oikoi, oikos, is the Greek word for house. And in essence, what you're seeing here with oikumene is kind of the political house of that era, that particular time period. It was throughout the Roman Empire. In fact, you'll find some translations in a margin will say oikumene, that is the Roman Empire or the inhabited earth. So this is just, I don't want to go on too much with this. There's a lot I know that I've covered with all of this, but this is what you have to do when you study Bible prophecy. Now, my next episode, we're going to go back to the Antichrist, and we're going to look at an article that a good friend of mine, Dr. Michael Brown, wrote on the Antichrist. Dr. Brown and I, we agree on a lot of things. We don't agree on eschatology. But I want you to, in the next episode, I'm going to go through this article that he wrote on Antichrist, and I have to say, it's a pretty good article, even though there are a couple of things I don't agree with. So this is the first episode of Bible Prophecy Under the Microscope. I'm Gary DeMar. If you want more information about this, go to my the webpage of the organization where I work called American Vision, AmericanVision.org. Thank you very much.
Thanks for podcasting with Gary DeMar. Please subscribe and share this with anyone you think really needs to hear it.
The janitors went home.
For those of you who may not be familiar too much with Bible prophecy and are looking for maybe a single book that will help you work through the issues and the topics, The book I recommend, because I wrote it, is Last Days Madness, and this book has developed over the years. It began as a book to deal specifically with certain issues related to Bible prophecy, which I have been looking at since probably the early part of the 1970s. So we're going on more than 50 years on all this. This takes me back to the late great Planet Earth, which was published in 1970. And a lot of people were enamored with that book and saw that as kind of an end time guidebook to the future. So I put together this book, Last Days Madness, and I deal with the issue of dating. In what way does the New Testament deal with dating issues? There are people today who kind of date set. They may not pick a particular day, although some people have, but most of them deal with kind of a seasonal approach to it. We're living in the season of the last days. I deal with the timing issues, the phraseology like to come in glory. I deal with the signs that people always bring up regarding the last days. Deal with the temple. Will the temple be rebuilt? Show me a verse in the Bible in the New Testament that says the temple is going to be rebuilt. What about the Great Tribulation of Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21? How about signs in the heavens? What does that mean? The sun, moon, and stars. And what does it mean in the return of Christ? Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven, gathering the elect. What is the meaning of this generation in Matthew chapter 24? Does it mean this race of people, the generation that sees these signs? Is there a very specific word that separates the word genos, which is a Greek word which refers to race, and genea, which refers to generation? How do you come to that sort of conclusion? I deal with the Schofield claim that race is the proper definition of it, based upon what he calls all lexicons agree, which is just plain nonsense. The rapture. The rapture is a big deal today. What in the world does the Bible say about this thing called the rapture? And then the number of the beast, the 666, what does that mean? What about technology? And supposedly the mark of the beast is going to be about modern day technology. And who are these beasts in Revelation chapter 13? There are actually two of them mentioned, the sea beast and the land beast. Oh, the Antichrist. Definitional issue regarding the Antichrist. When was the Antichrist? Actually, when were the Antichrists? What is the last hour that John mentions? What is the biblical definition of Antichrist? I have two chapters on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians 2, that Paul is dealing with. The temple was still standing. Paul states in verse 6, you know what restrains him now. So it seems to me it indicates with the temple still standing, and Paul saying that the man of lawlessness was alive in their day, that we need to find a first century explanation for what Paul is describing there. Daniel 70 weeks. This is another one of those passages in Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, where 70 weeks of years, 490 years, and then they put a gap between the 69th week and the 70th week, and we are now living in that gap of nearly 2,000 years. Does the Bible really teach gaps when specific numbers are given? If you look at Daniel chapter 9, the very beginning of 9, it talks about the 70 years of captivity. Was there a gap between the 69th and the 70th year of the captivity? And what if God had put one there? Again, thinking all this through, you come to a better conclusion. Let the Bible speak for itself. What about today in terms of the world and Bible prophecy? What's Mystery Babylon? I have a very short section in there on Ezekiel 38 and 39. I have a larger, more comprehensive book on that called the Gog and Magog End Time Alliance. I'll probably get to that sometime in this series. I have a couple of appendixes in there. The issue on timing. God can tell time. Those timing texts are important. What about the tree, the budding of the fig tree in Matthew chapter 24? And then compare that with Matthew chapter 21, is the issue of anti-Semitism and eschatology. What about the doctrine of sola scriptura and prophecy? And I have a very short appendix on Zechariah 14 and the coming of Christ. I'm working on a larger book, a verse-by-verse exposition of that. Hopefully I'll have that out within a year or so. It's a pretty long exposition of Zechariah chapter 14, one of the most difficult chapters in the entire Bible dealing with eschatology. So if you're looking for a very comprehensive book on this topic that I'll be discussing through this podcast on eschatology that I'll be doing, I'd suggest that you get Last Days Madness, The Obsession of the Modern Church, and you can get that at AmericanVision.org, AmericanVision.org.